Horror and survival horror. Two genres of games that have existed since the dawn of justice. Even though both genres contain the word horror, which is defined in the Merriam-Webster dictionary as horror and survival horror are more different than you think. Hidden within them are two different game design philosophies, each with different objectives and ways of scaring you right out of your seat. To be fair with you, horror can mean and encompass a variety of games. But this is what I would classify as a horror game. A horror game is a game that is specifically designed to scare the bejesus out of you, mainly by leaving you helpless with no other choice but to run or hide from the proverbial monster.
Let's just strut my way.
There's gotta be something over here, right?
Oh, no, 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 no! Oh, no! Oh, no!
Popular games that fall into this category include Slender, Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Outlast, Five Nights at Freddy's. There are several descriptions that fit this type of game. First, the game is usually a low-budget indie game or a AA game. Second, you normally have no or very little weapons. And because of that, you normally would have number 3, which is very limited inventory, barely any inventory management. Fourth, horror games are normally more linear. You only go through like one set path. And fifth, horror games are normally more cinematically driven. Funnily enough, these types of games feel like the game counterpart of low-budget horror movies. In a horror movie, the main character is also a helpless, sad human. These games feel more like haunted houses that you go in like Halloween Horror Nights in your Universal Studios thingy. But instead of it lasting for 3 minutes, they last for 3 hours, giving you a freaking heart attack. Slender, for example, has you find 8 pages, which are spread randomly throughout the map, while avoiding the Slender Man who likes to sneak up on you. All you have by your side is a flashlight that will run out of power if you use it too much. Very simple premise, but very effective. Amnesia: The Dark Descent has more things to play with than Slender. You're supposed to go deeper into the castle while avoiding freaky looking enemies. While the game has some very unique features like the sanity meter. Ooh, sanity meter. That you need to maintain by progressing the game, not looking at enemies and being in the light. The central horror gameplay element is still there. You can't fight the enemies, you can't freaking fight the monsters, you still have to run or hide. Now, Amnesia has a lot of mechanics to work with, but if there's not a lot of mechanics, the game can get stale really fast. I recently completed Outlast and Outlast 2. Truly bloody scary games. Daddy, I don't want to touch that game!
Little pig.
The game gives you a night vision camera, a health system, healing items, and key items. But that's it. While the game has made me clench my butt hard, once I got over the mechanics of encounter enemy, run, and sometimes I need to find an item, the core gameplay loop did get pretty stale to me. It's because of this focus on horror set pieces and a lack of creative mechanics that horror games can't be too long. When there is no difficulty shift that happens when you progress through the game, only story progression, the game can't be too long. That is all. So this was actually something that Five Nights at Freddy's solved. Its simple point-and-click gameplay where you're only in one room allows for a variety of mechanics to be added as you progress through each and every night. It's definitely a magic formula that Scott Cawthon cooked that turned FNAF into an entire franchise. Say whatever you want about the cheap jump scares, which I cannot deny, but the management of a variety of knobs and controls to prevent a death screen, it's pretty darn good. Speaking of management of knobs, FNAF does segue us closer to the other genre of horror game that I want to discuss. Survival horror, survival horror, survival horror. Okay, what the hell is survival horror? A survival horror game is a game that of course also makes you crap your pants, but includes more involved mechanics where you have to manage your resources to overcome the horror that you face. Horror. The main differentiator here is that you can fight back your enemies. Yes, that's right, in a survival horror game, you can fight back your enemies, and often in different ways. That makes a survival horror game more gamey in that respect than a typical horror game. Essentially, a survival horror game is a survival game with horror elements. Survival horror games take elements from more action-based games like inventory management, modifying these mechanics so you have even more limited supplies. So you can't just randomly kill old Jerry over there. Oh, how you doing, old Jerry? I know you want to kill me, but I only got 2 bullets, so I don't want to touch you. You know, you go zombie your whole way into your room. You're doing good, man. You're doing good. Some survival horror games provide you with too much inventory that it doesn't even feel like a survival game anymore. Games that fall in the survival horror category hence have limited inventory management, encouraging smart gameplay. Weapons that can actually kill enemies. Rich exploration. Oh yes, the location is a character. Quite interestingly, survival horror games predate horror games. While conventional horror games didn't get popular until the 2010s, one of the very first survival horror games was Alone in the Dark back in 1992. The premise is simple. You're trapped in a haunted mansion and you need to get out of there. Explore the mansion, solve puzzles, and avoid enemies. The difference that Alone in the Dark has is that you can find weapons while you're exploring to kill enemies and bang them. What really put the term survival horror on the map though was Resident Evil. Released in 1996 and characterized by fixed camera angles, you're tasked to explore a, get this, resident that has evil. You don't play as any ordinary person. You play as a special operative, so you know how to bang people. In order to further explore the mansion that you're in, you actually have to solve puzzles and get certain key items that allow you to go to the next area. You're going to run into zombies in your exploration, and because you also have limited ammunition and weed that somehow heals you, as well as limited saves, you can't be aimless in what you do. Survival horror games have a very fun gameplay loop, mixing exploration, combat, strategy, and resource management. This effectively makes Resident Evil a puzzle game, inviting exploration even more than a typical horror game. What got me really into survival horror was Resident Evil 7. Biohazard. The main portion of the game takes place in the Baker's estate in Louisiana, and despite initially looking like a conventional horror game in the beginning, once you reach the main hall, the game gives you the freedom to explore this haunting mansion. It doesn't give you explicit hints on which room you have to explore first. You just explore with the limited resources that you have. From the main hall, I could go up to the second floor, or down to the basement, or try to find a way to get that shotgun over there. The choice is all mine, and sometimes I die a lot. But nevertheless, I like survival horror for that very flexibility. Add to that, you have a crafting system that forces you to make certain decisions. Should I make more ammunition or health? This was my first real exposure to the intricacies of survival horror, and I loved it. Resident Evil 7 began Capcom's return into survival horror, and it wasn't just a good survival horror game, but it's a damn scary game, might I add. What I like about Capcom's flavor of horror compared to other horror games is that the horror lies in the atmosphere, not necessarily the jump scares, the random creaks that you hear, the sound of footsteps. Most of the time it's nothing else but deafening silence. These environments are the things that unsettle you and make you scared, not the cheap jump scares. Also, did I mention that survival horror games have some amazing boss fights? It's a combination of combat, strategy, and Jesus, please don't kill me! One of the best horror boss fights that I've played is Marguerite, the mother in RE7. You're trapped in a tight space with a grotesque monster that's scary as hell, that spawns insect nests throughout the map that you need to deal with. And then the boss map also encompasses 2 floors that you can move around in, so there's good verticality. You've also got supplies scattered throughout the map in case you run out of ammunition. It's actually the perfect blend of strategy and horror that gave me the greatest satisfaction when I finally killed her. That feeling of fear to bravery to joy just doesn't happen when you play a horror game, but it does when you play a survival horror game where you are responsible for your actions. One other thing that makes the Resident Evil games so amazing is the game's extraordinary pace. Unlike a conventional horror game, the game features save rooms so you can relax and take a break from the horror, so that you can plan your exploration there with ease of mind. This makes the game cycle between terrifying and relaxing, allowing you to play for longer within one session. And if this is combined with evolving mechanics that are easy to do for a survival game, the game can stretch for long bouts of time. This mechanic was so precious to me, which was why I was so heartbroken when I knew Resident Evil 5 and 6 removed the save room. Who the hell turned my British accent on? Over the years though, we have seen more and more overlap between survival horror and action. Resident Evil 4 actually pioneered this in 2005 by making the game more action-oriented. Sure, the game still has some scary moments, but emo boy Leon S. Kennedy no longer needs to conserve ammunition. He can actually kick and kill whoever he wants. Dead Space also falls in this category where your precision gunplay, not your resource management, is put to the test. These games can still fall under the umbrella of survival horror, but they are still one step away from being Doom Eternal, and whatever that game was. Horror and survival horror have come a long way since their beginnings. Both genres actually have their own tropes, their own strengths, and their own weaknesses. Horror makes you crap your pants, and survival horror makes you use that crap as crafting material. One style puts you in an intense, difficult situation forcing you to run, and the other gives you a gun. Even though I've treated horror and survival horror to be 2 distinct design philosophies, we are seeing considerable overlap between horror and survival horror. Alien Isolation feels more like a horror game, but has a lot of enemies that you can actually kill or subdue. It only has one that you can't kill. Resident Evil 7, the remakes of 2 and 3, and Village increased emphasis on scares that you would find in a conventional horror game. You actually have pursuer enemies that you can kill, which ramp up the tension as you try to navigate your way around enemies that you can kill. And there are many more examples that I can't think of because I don't play them in a lot of games. But what do I think? What do I think about horror and survival horror? Well, if you ask my personal opinion, I do prefer survival horror because it's more similar to a game where you are responsible for killing all the enemies, even though you have limited inventory management. A horror game is essentially a roller coaster that you have to walk through and escape from. There are a lot of limitations in gameplay that don't make it a full-blown game like a survival horror game is. But anyways, you do you. Let me know what you think about horror games and survival horror games in general. They're damn fun. Make more, please.